The Texas sun had already burned away the morning dew by the time Jesse Carver reached the cemetery on the hill outside Cedar Hollow. July heat pressed down on everything like a hand, turning the air thick and heavy with the smell of dry grass and limestone dust. Jesse dismounted slowly, his boots hitting packed earth with a sound that seemed too loud in the stillness. The horse, a gray mare named Ash, stamped once and then went quiet as if she understood that this place demanded silence. Jesse stood there for a long moment, hat in his hand, staring at a grave marker that bore no name, just a date. June 14th, 1884, 1 month ago. 1 month since Margaret Ashmore had died and Jesse had been 200 miles away, living his careful, controlled life on a ranch he had built specifically to keep the world at a distance. He had not known she was sick, had not known she was dying, had not known until a letter arrived 3 weeks late, forwarded through 2 different territories, that the woman he had loved and abandoned 10 years ago was already in the ground. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photograph, the edges worn soft from handling. Margaret, at 19, standing in front of a boarding house in Cedar Hollow, her dark hair pulled back, her smile tentative but real. Jesse had taken this picture himself back when he still believed that wanting something was enough to make it right. Back before his father had made it clear that a Carver son did not marry a seamstress, did not throw away his future on a girl with nothing to her name but needle skills and a gentle heart. Jesse had been 25 then, old enough to know better, young enough to be a coward. He had left her. Taken the easy road his father paved with money and expectations, moved to San Antonio to learn the cattle business, convinced himself that time would make the guilt fade. It had not faded. It had calcified, turned into something hard and permanent inside his chest, something he carried every day like a stone in his pocket. The letter that reached him 3 weeks ago had been brief. Margaret Ashmore died of typhoid fever, left behind 2 daughters, Rosie, age 9, and Bertie, age 5. Services already held, thought you should know. The signature had been illegible, but the postscript was clear enough. The girls are being sent east on the orphan train. Auction in Cedar Hollow, July 28th. Today was July 28th. Jesse folded the photograph carefully and placed it at the base of the unmarked stone. He had ordered a proper headstone, would have it shipped from Austin, would make sure Margaret's name was carved in marble so deep that time could not erase it. But that would take weeks. For now there was only this blank marker, and the knowledge that he was 10 years too late for apologies. He did not pray, did not know what to say to a God who let good women die young while cowards lived on. He just stood there, feeling the heat soak through his black coat, feeling the weight of everything he had run from catch up to him all at once. Then he put his hat back on mounted Ash and rode toward town. The orphan train had pulled into Cedar Hollow the night before, and by mid-morning, the platform in front of the church was already crowded with curious townspeople and prospective families. Jesse tied Ash behind the general store and walked through the gathering, keeping to the edges, his eyes scanning the line of children arranged along the back of the wooden platform like goods awaiting inspection. He spotted them immediately. 2 girls at the far end of the line. The older one had auburn hair that caught the light, braided tight, but already escaping in wisps around her face. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin up, one hand gripping the shoulder of a smaller girl beside her. The younger child was pale blonde, almost white-haired in the harsh sunlight, and she held a stuffed rabbit missing one ear pressed against her chest like a shield. Jesse's breath caught. Even from this distance, even through 10 years, and the changes that time carved into inherited features, he could see Margaret in both of them. The older girl had her mother's sharp chin and fierce eyes. The younger one had her delicate bone structure, her slight frame. His daughters, maybe, probably. Jesse made himself breathe, made himself stay still, while the auctioneer, a man with a voice like oil sliding over gravel, worked his way down the line. A boy of 12 went to a farmer needing field hands. Twin girls, 7 years old, went to a couple who wanted to raise them as their own. A toddler, barely walking, went to a woman who held him like he was made of glass. Then the auctioneer reached the 2 girls at the end. Lot 14, the man called out, checking his papers. Bertie Ashmore, age 5, healthy, quiet, no behavioral concerns, would make an excellent addition to any family seeking a young daughter. One of the matrons, a tired-looking woman in gray, guided the small blonde girl forward. The child moved like she was underwater, slow and disconnected, her green eyes fixed on nothing. She clutched the rabbit tighter. "Now this one is a real sweetheart." The auctioneer continued, his voice taking on the practiced warmth of a man selling something he wanted gone. "Quiet as a church mouse, won't give you a lick of trouble. Perfect age for molding. Start fresh with this little lady, and you will have yourself a proper daughter before you know it." A couple near the front, well-dressed and prosperous-looking, leaned together and whispered. The woman nodded. The man raised his hand. "We are interested," he said. "My wife has been wanting a daughter just this age." "Excellent, excellent," the auctioneer beamed. "The placement fee is—" "Wait." The word cut through the humid air like a blade. Jessie turned to see the older girl push through the line of children, stumbling past the matron who tried to grab her arm. She reached her sister and dropped to her knees, wrapping both arms around the smaller girl with a ferocity that made the crowd go still. "Wait, you cannot," the older girl said, her voice shaking but clear. "She is my sister. We go together. They promised we would go together." "Ma'am, sir," the auctioneer said, his smile tightening at the edges. "Lot 15 is Rosie Ashmore, the older sister. She is available separately if you are interested in both." "We do not want the older one," the woman said, not even looking at Rosie. "She is too old, and I have heard she is difficult." "I am not difficult," Rosie's voice cracked. "I am her sister. I take care of her. She needs me." "Child, please." The matron reached for Rosie's arm again. "We discussed this. Not every family can take two." "You promised." Rosie twisted away, pulling Bertie closer. "Mrs. Patterson said we would stay together. She said if I was good, if I did not cause trouble, if I—" "Rosie." The matron's voice softened, but her hands did not stop reaching. "Mrs. Patterson is not here, and the Hendersons have offered a good home for your sister, a real home with a mother and father. And I am her family." Rosie screamed it, the word tearing out of her like something that had been caged too long. "Me. I am the one who held her when Mama died. I am the one who fed her when they forgot at the orphanage. I am the one who—" "That is quite enough." The auctioneer's patience evaporated. "Someone restrain this child before she— You cannot have her without me." Rosie threw herself over Bertie completely, then shielding her sister's body with her own. The matron and two other adults tried to pull them apart. The older girl held on with a strength that seemed impossible for her size, and throughout it all, the younger child made no sound. She just pressed her face into her sister's neck and gripped that one-eared rabbit like it was the only real thing left in the world. Jessie watched something fall out of Rosie's pocket as she struggled, something small and metallic that hit the wooden platform with a soft clink and skittered toward the edge. Jessie moved without thinking, his boots carrying him forward before his brain caught up. He reached the platform steps and bent down, picking up the object before it could fall through the gap in the boards. It was a knife. Small, decorative, the kind a gentleman might carry for cutting cigars or opening letters. The handle was bone-yellowed with age, and carved into it were two letters. J.C. Jessie Carver. The knife he had given Margaret 10 years ago, the night he told her he loved her, the night before he left and never came back. He had thought it was lost, had assumed she threw it away or sold it or burned it in anger at his betrayal, but she had kept it. And somehow it had ended up in her daughter's pocket, carried like a talisman or a weapon, or a secret too important to leave behind. Jessie looked up at the platform, at the two girls locked together in desperate defiance, at the crowd beginning to shift with discomfort, people looking away, crossing arms, shaking heads. At the well-dressed couple stepping back, calculation clear on their faces. Too much trouble, too much drama, not worth it. He looked at the knife in his palm, at his own initials carved into bone. Then he climbed the steps. The sound of his boots on wood made people turn. Jessie was a big man, 6 feet 2 inches of ranch work and sun-weathered leather, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same limestone that made up the Texas hills. He had the kind of presence that made spaces feel smaller, made people pay attention whether they wanted to or not. "How much?" Jessie said. The auctioneer blinked. "I am sorry, for both of them." "How much?" Silence, the kind that made the cicadas sound loud. "Mr. Carver?" The auctioneer recovered barely. I did not realize you were interested in... I am not interested in repeating myself. Jesse kept his eyes on the girls. Rosie was staring up at him with an expression caught between hope and suspicion, like she had learned the hard way that hope was just another word for disappointment. Bertie had not moved, her face still buried in her sister's shoulder. How much for both? Well, the standard placement fee is $15 per child, but there are additional costs for... Jesse pulled his wallet from his coat, counted out bills with steady hands, laid them on the podium. That is $100. That covers placement travel expenses and whatever else you are about to invent a fee for. I want the papers drawn up today. Legal and binding. Both girls. My name. Mr. Carver. With all due respect, you are a single man, a bachelor. The board typically prefers... The board can prefer whatever it likes. Jesse did not raise his voice. Did not need to. I have 12,000 acres, a house with more rooms than I can count, and the means to provide for 2 children better than anyone else standing in this yard. You want to argue about it, we can argue in front of Judge Reed. I expect he will see things my way. The auctioneer looked at the money, looked at Jesse, looked at the crowd who were watching with mouths open. Jesse Carver, the hermit rancher who had not been seen in town more than twice a year for the past 7 years, buying 2 orphan girls. They would talk about this until winter. I will have the papers ready within the hour, the auctioneer said finally. Jesse turned back to the girls. Rosie still had not loosened her grip on Bertie, not 1 inch. She was looking up at Jesse with those burning eyes, and he could see the war happening behind them, wanting to believe, terrified to believe, knowing that trust was just another way to get hurt. Jesse crouched down slowly, making himself smaller, meeting Rosie at her level. Up close, the resemblance to Margaret was even stronger. The same stubborn set to the jaw, the same intelligence burning in eyes that had seen too much. I am not going to separate you, Jesse said quietly. That is the first thing. You and your sister stay together. That is not a negotiation. Rosie's jaw trembled. Why, because I heard what you said. And you are right. You are her family. But why do you want us? Rosie's voice dropped to a whisper. Nobody wants both of us. They always want her because she is little and pretty. Or they want neither of us because I am too much trouble. Nobody wants both. Jesse held out his hand, palm up, offering, not demanding. In his other hand, hidden from view, he still held the small knife with his initials carved in bone. Well, I expect nobody is me, he said. I am Jesse Carver. I have a ranch about 7 miles north of here. Big place, quiet, lots of room for 2 girls who need a place to land. Rosie looked at his hand like it might vanish. What do you want from us? Right now, just for you to come home with me. Get some food in you. Let your sister breathe somewhere that is not a platform. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Beyond that, I figure we will work it out as we go. Rosie searched his face for a long moment. Jesse let her look. He had nothing to hide. Nothing except the knife in his left hand, the photograph at the cemetery, and the truth about why he had really come to this auction. But those secrets could wait. Right now, what mattered was getting these 2 children somewhere safe. Bertie does not talk, Rosie said finally. She has not said a word since Mama died. That was a year ago. That is all right, Jesse said. I am not much of a talker myself, and she gets scared at night, has nightmares. We will handle it. Rosie's hand trembled as she reached out and placed it in Jesse's palm. Her fingers were small and rough, calloused in ways a 9-year-old's hands should not be, and they gripped his with a ferocity that said, I am trusting you, and I will destroy you if you betray me in the same breath. Jesse stood slowly, drawing Rosie up with him. Bertie came to still, pressed against her sister's side, still silent. But as Jesse turned to leave the platform, the small girl's hand shot out and grabbed a handful of his coat. Not his hand, just his coat. Holding on. It was enough. The whispers started before they even reached the wagon. Jesse heard fragments as he guided the girls through the crowd, Rosie walking beside him with her spine straight and her chin up, Bertie riding on his hip because she had reached for him with her eyes, and he had understood. Lost his mind. 2 girls. What is a bachelor going to do with 2 girls? Probably send them back inside a month. Poor things. Out of one bad situation into another. Jesse kept walking. Let them talk. He had spent 7 years not caring what Cedar Hollow thought of him. He was not about to start now. His wagon was parked behind the general store, already loaded with the supplies he had come to town for before the auction. Barbed wire, salt licks, coffee, the things a ranch needed. He set Bertie on the bench seat first, then helped Rosie up. The older girl climbed mostly on her own, refusing to need more help than she had to accept. Jesse checked the horses, climbed up beside them, and drove north out of Cedar Hollow without looking back. They rode in silence for the first mile. The road wound through hill country that rolled green and gold under the summer sun, live oaks providing patches of shade that felt like small mercies. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. Hawks circled overhead with the patience of things that knew how to wait. Rosie sat between Jesse and the edge of the bench, creating a buffer between her sister and this stranger who had just bought them. Bertie leaned against Rosie's left side, the stuffed rabbit pressed between them. "You scared?" Jesse asked without looking at Rosie. She was quiet for a moment. "Should I be?" "Probably not. But I expect you will be anyway until you have reason not to be. Most people would tell me I do not need to be scared, that everything is going to be fine. Most people are liars." Jesse adjusted his grip on the reins. "I am not going to tell you everything is fine because I do not know that yet. What I know is this. You will have a roof over your heads tonight that does not leak. You will have food that is better than what you have been eating. You will have beds. Your own beds in your own rooms if you want them, or the same room if that is what you and Bertie need." "Same room," Rosie said immediately. "I need to be able to reach her at night." "Same room, then." Another mile passed. Bertie had fallen asleep against Rosie's shoulder, the rabbit tucked under her chin. Her breathing was slow and even, the sleep of a child who had learned to rest whenever safety presented itself because she never knew when it would come again. Jesse could feel Rosie watching him, studying him, trying to figure out what kind of man picks up two strange children on a Tuesday morning and takes them home like stray dogs. Finally she spoke. "Can I ask you something? You are going to ask whether I say yes or not. I can tell." The ghost of a smile crossed Rosie's face, first one Jesse had seen. "Are you rich?" "I do all right. That is what rich people say when they do not want to admit they are rich." Rosie looked at him sideways. $100 is a lot of money." "It is." "And you just had it, in your wallet, like it was nothing." "It was not nothing." Jesse kept his eyes on the road. "It was you and your sister." Rosie absorbed this, then carefully, like she was testing the weight of each word before she spoke it, she asked, "Did you know our mother?" Jesse's hands tightened on the reins. The question he had been waiting for. The question he did not have a good answer to. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you came to the auction looking for us specifically. I could tell. You were not surprised when you saw us. You knew what you were looking for." Smart. Too smart. Jesse should have expected that. Margaret had been brilliant in her quiet way, had seen through his excuses and his carefully constructed justifications, even when he was spinning them. Of course her daughter would have inherited that clarity. "I knew your mother a long time ago," Jesse said finally. "It was not quite a lie. Before you were born." "How long ago?" 10 years, give or take." Rosie was silent for a moment, processing. "Then, did you love her?" Jesse's throat closed. He swallowed twice before he could speak. "Yes." "Then why did you leave?" The question hit like a fist. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop, needing to not be moving for this conversation. The horses stamped and blew, grateful for the rest. Bertie stirred but did not wake. Jesse turned to look at Rosie directly. She deserved that much. Deserved to see his face when he told her the truth. "Because I was a coward," he said. "Because my family did not approve of her. Because I chose the easy road over the right one. Because I was 25 years old and stupid enough to think that wanting something was the same as deserving it." Rosie's eyes were very bright. "Did she know you loved her?" "Yes." "Did you know she was going to have a baby?" Jesse's heart stopped. The world narrowed to Rosie's face, to the question hanging between them like a blade. "I knew she might be," he said carefully. "I left before I could know for certain." "So you just left?" knowing she might be pregnant, knowing she would be alone. Yes. Rosie looked away, blinking hard. That was a terrible thing to do. Yes, it was. Are you sorry? Every day for 10 years? Sorry does not change anything. No, it does not. They sat there in the stopped wagon, the Texas heat pressing down the truth sitting between them like something with weight and mass. Finally, Rosie spoke again, her voice very small. Are Bertie and I, are we why you came back? Jesse chose his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. I came back because I heard your mother had died. I came to find her, to apologize, to try to make things right after 10 years, but I was too late. She was already gone. He paused. When I learned she had 2 daughters being sent away on the orphan train, I knew I had to find you. I owed her that much. I owed you that much. It was true. All of it was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth included the photograph at the cemetery. The sick certainty in Jesse's gut that these might be his daughters, the bone-deep need to know if the child Margaret had been carrying when he left had grown into the fierce 9-year-old sitting beside him now. But Rosie did not need to know that yet. Maybe would never need to know if Jesse could not find a way to confirm it that would not destroy whatever fragile trust they were building. Rosie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I do not know if I can forgive you for leaving her. I am not asking you to. Good, because I do not think I can. That is fair. Rosie looked at her sleeping sister, then back at Jesse. But I think Mama would want us to have a home. And you are offering us one. So I guess we will try it. For her. Jesse nodded once, sharp and final. For her. He clicked the horses forward and they continued north. Neither of them spoke again until the ranch came into view over the last hill. The main house sat solid and sprawling against the green hills, limestone and timber built to last. Barns and outbuildings spread behind it, corrals where horses dozed in the shade, and beyond them the pastures running out to the horizon dotted with cattle. Rosie drew in a breath. That is all yours. Ours, Jesse corrected before he thought about it. Then he let the word stand because it felt right. That is ours. The wagon pulled up to the front of the house. Before Jesse could set the brake, the front door opened and a woman appeared on the porch. Eliza Hightower was 30 years old, built like someone who had survived things that would have killed most people and come through with her spine intact. She had skin the color of warm earth eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of stillness that came from learning early that showing emotion was dangerous. She was also Jesse's half-sister, though neither of them had asked for that relationship. She had shown up at Jesse's ranch 5 years ago, told him exactly who she was, and informed him that she would work as his housekeeper because she had no other options, but that did not mean she had to like him or respect him or pretend they were family. Jesse had agreed to her terms, had given her a room in the house, fair wages, and as much distance as she needed. They lived in the same space but separate orbits, circling each other with careful politeness that never quite became warmth. Now Eliza stood on the porch and looked at the wagon, at the 2 small girls, at Jesse's face, and her expression went through half a dozen emotions in 2 seconds before landing on something that looked like Lord of Mercy mixed with you fool. Jesse Carver, Eliza said, what have you done? Eliza, this is Rosie, and the little one sleeping is Bertie. They are staying. Staying how? Staying like your horse is staying. Staying like that stray cat you fed once, and it never left. Or staying like family. Eliza's eyes moved from Jesse to Rosie, who was standing by the wagon wheel with her chin up and her shoulders back, looking at the big house with an expression that mixed wonder and disbelief. Then Eliza's gaze sharpened, focused, and Jesse saw the exact moment she recognized something in Rosie's face. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the way she held herself defiant even when exhausted. Eliza looked back at Jesse. Her expression had gone very still, very careful. We need to talk, she said quietly. Later. Right now these girls need food and beds. Jesse. Later, Eliza. Eliza held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once and came down the porch steps. She walked to where Rosie stood and bent to the girl's level, her face softening in a way Jesse had never seen. Child, Eliza said gently, when is the last time you ate a real meal? Rosie thought about it. I do not remember. That is what I figured. Eliza held out her hand. Come inside. I have stew on the stove and cornbread in the oven. By the time you have eaten your fill, we will figure out the rest." Rosie looked at Eliza's outstretched hand, looked at Jessie, who nodded, looked at Bertie, still sleeping against his shoulder. Then she took Eliza's hand and let herself be led inside. Jessie followed, carrying Bertie, and as he crossed the threshold of his house with a child in his arms, for the first time in 7 years of living alone, he felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, just cracking. Just enough to let something through that he had kept sealed away for so long he had forgotten what it felt like. Hope, maybe, or fear, or the sick understanding that he had just set in motion something he could not control and could not take back. The girls were here. Margaret's daughters. Maybe his daughters, probably his daughters, though he had no way to know for certain without asking questions that would destroy them. And tomorrow or next week or next month, someone was going to ask those same questions. Someone was going to notice the resemblance. Someone was going to wonder why Jessie Carver, who had not shown interest in family or children or anything beyond his ranch for 7 years, suddenly took in 2 orphan girls whose mother he used to know. Someone was going to figure it out. And when they did, Jessie was going to have to answer for every lie he had told and every truth he had hidden. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today he had 2 exhausted children who needed food and safety and beds that did not creak with the weight of 30 other orphans. Today he would feed them and keep them safe, and he would figure out the rest as he went. That night, after Eliza had fed the girls until Rosie could barely keep her eyes open and Bertie had curled into a ball on the kitchen bench with her rabbit, Jessie carried them upstairs to the room he had prepared. 2 beds, clean quilts, a lamp on the dresser that could burn low all night if they needed it. Rosie climbed into one bed, then immediately held out her arms for Bertie. Jessie set the smaller girl beside her sister and watched Rosie wrap around Bertie like a shield, like she had done it 1,000 times, like it was the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense a year ago. "You will be safe here," Jessie said quietly from the doorway. "I promise you that much." Rosie looked at him with those 2 old eyes. People break promises. Some people do. I do not. "We will see," Jessie nodded, accepting that. "Good night, Rosie." He turned to leave. "Mr. Carver." Jessie looked back. Rosie had pulled something from under her pillow, was holding it in her hand. Even in the low light, Jessie recognized it, the small knife with the bone handle. His initials carved deep. "This fell out of my pocket today," Rosie said. "At the auction. I saw you pick it up. I want it back." Jessie walked back into the room, pulled the knife from his coat pocket, and held it out to her. Rosie took it, closed her fingers around it, and met his eyes. "This was Mama's," she said. "She told me a man gave it to her a long time ago, a man she loved, a man who left her." Rosie's voice was very steady. "That man was, you, was it not?" Jessie could have lied, should have lied, but he had promised himself that whatever else he did, he would not lie to these children about things that mattered. "Yes," he said, "that man was me." Rosie nodded slowly, like he had confirmed something she already knew. "So you did not just happen to be at the auction today. You came looking for us." "I came looking for your mother. I found you instead." "Why?" "Because 10 years is a long time to live with regret. Because I wanted to tell her I was sorry. Because I—" Jessie stopped, swallowed. "Because I thought maybe there was a chance she had that there might be children. And if there were, I wanted to make sure they were all right." "You wanted to know if we were yours," Rosie said flatly. "Yes." "Are we?" Jessie looked at her, at Bertie sleeping against her shoulder, at the fierce intelligence in those eyes that were so much like Margaret's. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Your mother and I were together for 6 months 10 years ago. When I left, I did not know if she was pregnant. I have spent 10 years wondering. But I have no way to know for certain without—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Without asking Mama, and she is dead," Rosie finished for him. "So you will never know." "No, I do not think I will." Rosie was quiet for a long time, her thumb running over the carved initials on the knife handle. Then she tucked it back under her pillow and looked at Jessie with an expression he could not read. "I do not know if you are my father," she said slowly. "Mama never told me who my father was, just that he was gone and he was not coming back. But I know one thing. If you were him, if you are the man who left her alone and pregnant, then you are the reason she had to work herself to death trying to feed us. You are the reason she was too weak to fight the fever when it came." Jesse flinched like she had hit him, because she was right. If he was their father, if Margaret had been carrying his child when he left, then her death was his fault. The chain of cause and effect ran straight from his cowardice to her grave. "You are right," he said hoarsely. "If I am your father, then I killed your mother as surely as the fever did." Rosie's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Then why should I let you be anything to us now? Why should I trust you not to leave again?" "Because I cannot leave any more." Jesse knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to her level. "Because running away only works until you run out of places to run. Because I spent 7 years alone on this ranch trying to outrun what I did, and it did not work. The guilt followed me. The regret followed me. And now you and your sister are here, and maybe you are mine or maybe you are not, but either way, I owe your mother a debt I can never repay. And the only way I can even try is to make sure her daughters are safe and cared for and loved." "You do not love us?" Rosie said. "You do not even know us." "No, but I loved your mother, and I will learn to love you if you let me try." Rosie stared at him for a long, long moment. Then she lay down, pulling Bertie closer, and turned her face to the wall. "Good night, Mr. Carver." It was a dismissal. Jesse took it. He stood, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I am sorry. For everything I did and everything I did not do, I am sorry." Rosie did not answer. Jesse left the door cracked open, the lamp burning low, and went downstairs. Eliza was waiting for him in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee on the table. She pointed at the chair across from her. "Sit." Jesse sat. Eliza pushed a cup toward him and studied his face with the intensity of someone reading a map in the dark. "Those girls," she said finally, "they are Margaret Ashmore's daughters." "Yes." "The same Margaret Ashmore you told me about." "The one you left 10 years ago." "Yes." "And you think they might be yours?" "I do not know. I cannot know." Eliza leaned back, shaking her head. "Lord Jesse, you do not do anything halfway, do you? Could not just leave well enough alone? Could not just let the past stay buried?" "The past was never buried," Jesse said tiredly. "It was always right here," he tapped his chest, "eating me alive one day at a time." "So you brought it into your house? Gave it a name and a bed and a place at your table?" "I gave 2 orphan girls a home." "You gave yourself a chance to play savior and call it redemption." Eliza's voice was sharp. "But redemption does not work like that, Jesse. You do not get to buy your way out of guilt with $100 and good intentions." "I know that." "Do you? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you are trying to fix the past by stealing from the future. Those girls do not know if you are their father. You do not know, and instead of being honest with them, instead of giving them a choice, you just took them, bought them like cattle, and brought them home. I saved them from being separated, from being sent to different families, from losing the only person they have left in the world. Maybe, or maybe you just made sure you would never have to face the truth." Eliza leaned forward. "What happens when they grow up and start asking questions? What happens when Rosie figures out that you are not just some guilty stranger trying to do right, but the man who might be her father and chose not to claim her when it mattered? I will tell her the truth." "Which truth? That you do not know if you are her father, or that you do know, and you are too much of a coward to face it?" Jesse's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "I do not know what you want from me, Eliza." "Mep." "I want you to be honest, with them and with yourself." Eliza stood, picked up her cup. "Those girls deserve better than a man who is using them to make himself feel less guilty. They deserve someone who will love them for who they are, not who they might be to him." She walked toward the stairs, then paused. "And, Jesse, if you hurt those children, if you let them down, the way you let their mother down, I will make sure you regret it. Blood or no blood, I will make you pay." She climbed the stairs, leaving Jesse alone in the kitchen with cold coffee and the weight of everything he had set in motion. He sat there for a long time, listening to the house settle around him, listening to the soft sounds of 2 children sleeping upstairs, the creak of floorboards as Eliza moved through her room, the tick of the clock on the mantel, counting off seconds that felt like judgments. Finally, when the coffee was cold and the lamp was burning low, Jesse stood and walked upstairs. He paused outside the girl's room listening. He could hear Rosie's breathing, quick and uneven, the breathing of someone pretending to sleep. Could hear Bertie's softer, steadier rhythm. Jesse pressed his palm against the doorframe, a gesture that was half prayer and half apology, and then walked to his own room. He did not sleep. Just lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, turning the knife problem over in his mind. The knife that proved he had known Margaret. The knife that Rosie had kept, that she clutched like evidence, or like hope, or like a weapon she might use against him someday. The knife that raised the question he could not answer and could not escape. Were they his? And if they were, what did he owe them? What did they deserve from him that he was capable of giving? Jesse did not have answers. Only the sick certainty that he had walked into a trap of his own making, and the only way out was through. Through the lies and the truth and the space between them, where families were built on foundations of hope and fear, and the desperate need to believe that second chances were real, even when first chances had been wasted. Outside, the Texas night pressed close and hot. Inside, three people who did not know how to be a family tried to sleep under the same roof and failed. And down the hall, behind a cracked door, Rosie lay with her eyes open and her hand wrapped around a bone-handled knife, thinking about the man who might be her father, who had abandoned her mother, who had bought her and her sister like property and called it rescue. Thinking about whether she could ever forgive him, thinking about whether she even wanted to try. The morning came too early and too bright. Jesse had not slept, had spent the night staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of children in his house. Small feet padding to the bathroom. The creak of bed springs as Rosie shifted to check on her sister. The soft whimper that might have been a nightmare, followed by the whispered reassurance that only an older sister could give. He was already in the kitchen when Eliza arrived at dawn, already had coffee brewing and bread sliced for toasting. Eliza took one look at his face and shook her head. "You look like death." "I feel like it." "Good. Maybe that means you are thinking about what you have done." Eliza tied on her apron and began pulling out eggs and butter. "Those girls are going to wake up soon. You need to decide what kind of man you're going to be for them today." "What do you mean?" "I mean you can keep lying to them and to yourself, or you can start telling the truth." Eliza cracked eggs into a bowl with more force than necessary. "Your choice, but make it fast because that older girl is too smart to fool for long." Jesse opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps on the stairs stopped him. Rosie appeared in the doorway, already dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, her hair braided tight. She held something in her hand, something small that caught the morning light. The knife. She walked to the table without a word and set it down directly in front of Jesse's coffee cup. The bone handle gleamed pale against the dark wood. The initials J.C. stared up at him like an accusation. Rosie sat down across from him, her green eyes steady and unblinking. "I need you to answer a question," she said, "and I need you to tell me the truth this time. Not part of the truth. All of it." Jesse looked at Eliza, who had gone very still at the stove. She met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head, a warning, or maybe permission. He could not tell. He turned back to Rosie. "All right. Were you with my mother the night she died?" The question hit like a blow to the chest. Jesse's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "No, I told you, I have not seen your mother in 10 years. I did not even know she was sick until after she was already buried." "Then why did she have your knife? Why did she keep it all these years if you meant nothing to her?" "I meant something to her once," Jesse said quietly. "Long time ago, before you were born. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have." Rosie leaned forward, her young face hard with something that looked too old for 9 years. "I saw a man with Mama the night she died. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard voices. I came downstairs and I saw him through the crack in the door. A tall man, dark hair. He was arguing with her, and then—" her voice wavered, but did not break. "And then Mama started shaking, started choking, and the man left, just walked out while she was dying on the floor." The kitchen had gone completely silent. Even Eliza had stopped moving, her back rigid as she faced the stove. "I thought it was you," Rosie continued. "When you showed up at the auction, when I realized you knew Mama, I thought you were the man who killed her. That is why I have been carrying this knife. I was going to—" She stopped, swallowed. I was going to use it if you tried to hurt Bertie. Jesse felt something cold slide down his spine. Rosie, I swear to you on everything I have, I was not there. I was 200 miles away on my ranch. I did not even know your mother was in Cedar Hollow. I thought she had moved east years ago. Then who was he? Rosie's voice cracked. Who was the man who poisoned my mother? The word poisoned hung in the air like smoke. What makes you think she was poisoned? Jesse asked carefully. Because she was fine that morning. Tired, but fine. We had breakfast together. She was working on a dress for one of the rich ladies in town. And then that man came and they argued and he gave her tea. I saw him pour it. I saw her drink it. And within an hour she was... Rosie's hands trembled. The doctor said it was typhoid. But it was not typhoid. It was too fast. Too sudden. Eliza turned from the stove, her face grave. Child, that is a serious accusation. I know what I saw. Rosie's eyes blazed. And I have been too scared to say anything because nobody would believe a 9-year-old girl over a rich man. But now I have you. She looked at Jesse. You owed Mama something. You said so yourself. So here is how you pay that debt. You help me find out who killed her. And you help me make sure he pays for what he did. Jesse looked at this fierce, damaged child who was asking him to solve a murder, who was asking him to go up against people with money and power and connections, who was asking him to risk everything he had built, everything he had protected himself with for 7 years. He should say no. Should tell her she was wrong, that grief had made her see things that were not there, that her mother had died of natural causes, and nothing he did could change that. But he looked at her face, at the desperate certainty burning in her eyes, and he knew she was telling the truth. Or at least she believed she was telling the truth, and maybe that was the same thing. All right, Jesse said. Tell me everything you remember about that night. Everything about the man, what he looked like, what they argued about, every detail you can recall. Rosie's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost physical. He was tall, taller than you. He had gray in his hair at the temples. He wore expensive clothes, a suit, and he had a ring, a big gold ring on his right hand with a red stone. Did you hear what they argued about? Rosie closed her eyes, reaching back into memory. He said something about Mama needing to keep her mouth shut, about how certain people would not appreciate her spreading rumors. Mama told him she was not spreading rumors. She was telling the truth. And he said the truth was dangerous, that she had a family to think about, that we would be taken care of if she just... Rosie's eyes snapped open. If she just burned the dress. The dress? Jesse leaned forward. What dress? The one she was making for Mrs. Caldwell, Eleanor Caldwell, the richest woman in Cedar Hollow. Rosie's voice gained strength as the pieces connected. Mama had been working on it for weeks. A fancy ball gown with layers and layers of silk. She brought it home to work on the hem, and that is when she found it. Found what? Papers, tucked into the lining of the bodice. Mama did not mean to see them. She was just taking apart the old dress Mrs. Caldwell had given her for material, and the papers fell out. Rosie looked at Jesse. I do not know what they said. Mama would not tell me. But she was upset, really upset. She kept saying she did not know what to do, that she could not just ignore it, that people needed to know. Jesse's mind was racing. What happened to the dress and the papers? I do not know. After Mama died, everything happened so fast. The landlady came and took our things for back rent. Bertie and I were sent to the orphanage. I tried to find the dress, but it was gone. Everything was gone. Eliza had moved closer, listening with an intensity that made her stillness feel dangerous. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell, she said slowly, wife of Judge Thomas Caldwell, the man who handles all the legal matters for the territorial government, the man who controls half the land deals in 3 counties. You know them? Jesse asked. I worked in their house, Eliza said, 12 years ago before I came here, before emancipation was fully enforced in Texas, and I had a choice about where I worked. Her voice was flat, carefully empty of emotion. I know that family very well. What are they like? Eliza was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, each word was chosen with surgical precision. Judge Caldwell is a man who believes the law exists to serve those who can afford to use it. Eleanor Caldwell is a woman who believes her position in society is a divine right that must be protected at any cost. She paused. "And their daughter-in-law, Cordelia Caldwell, is a woman who has learned to be cruel from the best teachers." Jesse felt the pieces shifting, forming a picture he did not want to see. If Eleanor Caldwell was hiding something in that dress, something important enough to kill for, then we are talking about people who can destroy us without a second thought, Eliza finished. People who own the judge, the sheriff, half the town council. People who could make us disappear and no one would ask questions. "I do not care," Rosie said fiercely. "Mama is dead. Someone killed her, and I am not going to let them get away with it just because they are rich." "Rosie," Jesse started. "No." She stood up, her hands flat on the table. "You told me you owed Mama a debt. You told me you would protect us. Well, this is how you do it. Not by giving us a house and food and pretending everything is fine, by finding out the truth, by making sure the person who took Mama away from us pays for what they did." Jessie looked at Eliza. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable. Then she gave the smallest nod. "The girl is right," Eliza said. "If someone killed Margaret Ashmore to protect the Caldwell family secrets, and those girls are living under your roof, how long before whoever did it decides they are loose ends that need tying up?" The thought hit Jesse like ice water. He had been so focused on his own guilt, his own need for redemption, that he had not considered the girls might be in actual danger, that by bringing them here, by connecting himself to Margaret's death, he might have painted a target on all of them. "All right," he said, standing. "We investigate, quietly, carefully. We find out what Margaret knew, what she found in that dress, and who had reason to silence her. But Rosie, you have to promise me something." "What?" "You do not do anything on your own. You do not confront anyone. You do not put yourself or your sister at risk. We do this together or we do not do it at all." Rosie studied his face, measuring his sincerity. Then she nodded. "Together. Good. Now sit down and eat. We have a long day ahead of us." The sound of footsteps made them all turn. Bertie stood in the doorway, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, the rabbit clutched in her arms. She looked at the three of them gathered around the table at the knife gleaming in the morning light, and her green eyes went very wide. Then she walked straight to Rosie, climbed into her sister's lap, and buried her face in Rosie's shoulder. "It is all right, Bird," Rosie murmured, stroking her sister's hair. "Everything is all right." But it was not all right, and they all knew it. The pretense of safety had been shattered. Now they were co-conspirators in something dangerous, something that could destroy them all. Jessie looked at the two girls, at Eliza, standing with her arms crossed, and her face set in grim determination, and realized his house was no longer a refuge. It had become a war room, and the war had just begun. The next 3 days passed in a careful dance of normalcy and investigation. Jesse worked the ranch during the day, riding fence lines and checking cattle, but his mind was always elsewhere. Rosie helped Eliza in the kitchen and played with Bertie in the yard, but she watched everything with those sharp eyes, cataloging details, asking careful questions. And Bertie drew. She drew constantly, her charcoal pencils moving across paper in steady strokes that created horses and houses and people. Eliza noticed first that the drawings were not random. They were memories. The boarding house where the girls had lived with Margaret, the landlady who had taken their things, the church where the auction had been held, and one drawing done in careful detail of a tall man with gray at his temples and a ring on his right hand. "That is him," Rosie said when she saw it. "That is the man from that night." Eliza studied the drawing. She has a gift. This is remarkably detailed for a 5-year-old. "Bertie remembers everything," Rosie said quietly. "She just does not talk about it." Jessie looked at the drawing, at the man's face rendered in charcoal shadow and light. "We need to find out who he is." "I know who he is," Eliza said, her voice tight. "That is Richard Ashford, Eleanor Caldwell's cousin. He handles her business affairs when the judge is too busy." Jessie felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. I served him tea 100 times when I worked in that house." Eliza's hands clenched at her sides. "He is the kind of man who does not see servants as people, who talks about private matters in front of them because he assumes they are too stupid or too scared to remember." Her eyes met Jessie's. "I remember everything he said, every conversation I overheard, every dirty dealing he arranged." "Like what?" like stealing from the Territorial Charity Fund, like falsifying land records to take property from homesteaders who could not read contracts, like bribing officials to look the other way when Eleanor wanted something that was not legally hers. Eliza's voice shook with controlled fury. That family has been bleeding this territory dry for years, and everyone knows it. But nobody speaks up because the Caldwells own the courts, own the sheriff, own everything that matters. Then that is what Margaret found, Jessie said slowly. Evidence of theft, probably records of the charity fund embezzlement. Eleanor must have hidden the papers in the dress, thinking they would be safe in her own clothing. And Margaret, honest to a fault, could not look away once she knew. So Richard Ashford came to silence her, Rosie finished. And when she would not agree, when she said she was going to tell the truth, he poisoned her. The three of them stood in grim silence, the weight of it pressing down. Murder, corruption, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Cedar Hollow society. And they were three people with no power, no connections, and no proof beyond a child's testimony and a servant's memories. "We need evidence," Jessie said finally. "Something concrete, something that cannot be dismissed or ignored." "The dress," Rosie said. "If we can find it, if the papers are still in it, after a year, after your mother's death and everything that followed." Eliza shook her head. "That dress is long gone, child, probably burned the night Margaret died. Maybe not." Jessie was thinking fast. If Eleanor Caldwell had the dress in her possession, if Margaret was working on it when she died, then Eleanor would have wanted it back. She paid for expensive materials, paid for Margaret's labor. She would have sent someone to collect her property. "The landlady," Rosie said, her eyes lighting up. "Mrs. Garvey? She took all of Mama's things for back rent. She would have given the dress back to Mrs. Caldwell, would she not? Probably, but that does not help us if the dress is in Eleanor's house now." "Unless it is not," Eliza said slowly. "Eleanor is vain. She would not destroy an expensive ball gown just because the seamstress died. She would have it finished by someone else, worn it to prove that she could, that a poor woman's death meant nothing to her schedule." Jessie felt a chill. "You are saying she wore a dress with evidence of her crime sewn into the lining." "I am saying Eleanor Caldwell is arrogant enough to think no one would ever dare look. And arrogant people make mistakes." They spent the rest of the day planning. Jessie would go into town, make casual inquiries about Eleanor Caldwell's social schedule. Eliza would visit her few remaining contacts among the servants in wealthy households, see if anyone knew what had become of Margaret's final project. And Rosie would keep Bertie safe and quiet at the ranch. But that night, as Jessie was preparing to ride out the next morning, Bertie appeared at his bedroom door. She stood there in her nightgown backlit by the hallway lamp, her blonde hair a halo of light. The rabbit hung from one hand. She did not speak, just looked at him with those enormous green eyes that saw too much. Jessie crouched down. "What is it, little bird? Did you have a bad dream?" Bertie shook her head slowly. Then she walked forward, reached into the pocket of her nightgown, and pulled out something small. She held it out to Jessie with both hands like an offering. It was a piece of fabric, silk expensive, dyed a deep crimson, and embroidered in one corner in delicate gold thread were the initials E.C., Eleanor Caldwell. Jessie's heart stopped. "Bertie, where did you get this?" Bertie pointed at her rabbit. Jessie took the stuffed animal carefully and examined it. There in the seam along the rabbit's back was a small tear. He worked his fingers into the opening and felt more fabric inside. Carefully, he pulled it out. More silk, more crimson. And when he unfolded it completely, he found a piece of paper tucked in the center, folded so small it was barely larger than his thumb. His hands shook as he opened it. The paper was covered in numbers, columns and columns of figures, dates, amounts. And at the top, in a neat accountant's hand, Territorial Charity Fund. Disbursements 1883. But the disbursements did not match the dates. Money that should have gone to orphanages and hospitals and schools for freed slaves had been redirected. And at the bottom of the page in that same neat hand was a name. Eleanor C. Caldwell, Administrator. Jessie looked at Bertie. The child was watching him with an expression he could not read. "Waiting. You have had this the whole time," he said softly. Hidden in button. You knew it was important. Bertie nodded. Does Rosie know? Bertie shook her head. Why did you not tell her? Bertie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. And then, in a voice so small and rusty it barely counted as sound, she whispered, scared. Jessie's breath caught. You are talking. First time. Bertie whispered each word coming out slow and careful, like she was testing if her voice still worked. First time talking since Mama died, except with Rosie. I talk to Rosie when we are alone, but nobody else, not for a whole year. Does Rosie know you can talk to her? Yes, but she does not tell anyone because... Bertie's face crumpled. The man, the one who hurt Mama. He said if I told anyone what I saw, he would hurt Rosie too. He said little girls who talked too much had accidents, She swallowed hard, so I stopped. Jessie pulled her into his arms, this tiny child who had been carrying such a terrible burden for a year, and felt something break inside his chest. Bertie, listen to me. That man cannot hurt you. I will not let him. Do you understand you are safe here? He said Mama would be safe too, Bertie whispered against his shoulder, and then she died. Jessie had no answer to that, because she was right. Adults promise safety all the time and failed to deliver. Why should she trust him when experience had taught her that trust was just another word for disappointment? You are right, he said finally. I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen. I cannot promise I will never fail. But I can promise I will fight for you. I can promise I will do everything in my power to keep you and Rosie safe. And I can promise that if something does happen, I will not leave you to face it alone. He pulled back to look at her face. Is that enough? Bertie studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded and handed him the rabbit. Keep it safe. The papers. Rosie says they are why Mama died. So they must be important. They are very important and very dangerous, which is why we are going to be very careful about what we do next. Are you going to catch the bad man? I am going to try. What if he catches you first? Jessie wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her everything would be fine, that heroes always won and justice always prevailed. But Bertie had already learned that adults who promised impossible things were liars. Then Rosie will catch him, Jessie said. And if not Rosie, then Eliza. And if not Eliza, then someone. Because the truth has a way of coming out eventually, even when people try to bury it. Bertie nodded slowly, accepting this. Then she took her rabbit back, tucked the fabric piece into the torn seam, and turned to leave. Bertie, Jessie called softly. She looked back. Thank you for trusting me with this, for talking to me. I know it was hard. Not as hard as staying quiet, Bertie whispered. And then she was gone, padding back down the hallway to the room she shared with her sister, leaving Jessie alone with stolen evidence and the weight of a murdered woman's final act of defiance. Margaret had known she was in danger, had known that keeping this evidence would put her at risk. But she had also known that hiding it was the only way to protect her daughters. So she had sewn it into the one thing Bertie would never let go of, the one thing that would follow her daughter wherever she went. Button the rabbit was not just a comfort toy. It was a time bomb waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to pull the pin, and Jessie had just armed the trigger. The next morning, Jessie rode into Cedar Hollow alone. He left the evidence at the ranch with Eliza hidden in a place only the two of them knew about. He left Rosie and Bertie with strict instructions to stay inside, stay quiet, and not open the door for anyone. His first stop was the courthouse. Judge Thomas Caldwell held office hours every Thursday morning, and Jessie made sure to arrive just as the judge was finishing with a land dispute. Caldwell was a man in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy in photographs. He smiled when he saw Jessie offered a handshake that was firm and practiced. Mr. Carver, I heard you were in town the other day, making quite the purchase from what I understand. News traveled fast. Jessie had expected that. 2 girls from the orphan train. They needed a home. Very charitable of you, though I must say it has raised some eyebrows. A single man, no wife, taking in 2 young girls. Some folks wonder about your intentions. There was no threat in Caldwell's voice, just polite concern. But Jessie heard the undercurrent. You have drawn attention to yourself. Be careful. My intentions are to provide those children with a stable home and a future, Jesse said evenly. I cannot see how that should concern anyone. Of course, of course. I am sure you mean well. Caldwell leaned back in his chair. But you understand, in a town like Cedar Hollow, people talk. And when people talk, questions get asked. Questions about suitability, about whether a bachelor rancher is the appropriate guardian for vulnerable young girls. Are you saying someone has challenged my guardianship? Not yet. But my daughter-in-law Cordelia has expressed concerns. She sits on the charitable board that oversees child welfare in this territory. She takes her responsibilities very seriously. Translation: We are watching you. Step out of line and we will take those children away. Jesse kept his expression neutral. Mrs. Caldwell is free to express her concerns through the proper legal channels. I welcome any official review of my household. Caldwell's smile did not reach his eyes. I am sure it will not come to that. I simply wanted to make you aware that there are interested parties, people who care about the welfare of those children. I appreciate your concern, Judge. Now, if you will excuse me, I have business in town. Jesse left before Caldwell could respond, but he felt the man's eyes on his back all the way to the door. The message had been delivered. The Caldwell family knew about the girls, knew Jesse had taken them in, and they were making sure he understood that they were watching, which meant they were afraid that Bertie or Rosie might remember something, might say something, might connect the dots between Margaret's death and the family that had employed her. Jesse's second stop was the seamstress shop where Margaret had worked. The building was closed, a sign in the window advertising that the space was available for lease. Jesse peered through the dusty glass and saw nothing but empty shelves and a broken chair. You looking to rent? Jesse turned. An older woman stood on the boardwalk, her arms full of packages. He recognized her from town, though he could not recall her name. Just passing by, Jesse said. Used to be a seamstress here, I think. Margaret Ashmore. God rest her. Sweet woman. Died last year. Terrible shame. What happened to her things, her business? Landlord sold it all for back rent. What he could not sell, he burned. The needles and thread went to the new seamstress over on Maple Street. Everything else went to ash. The woman shifted her packages. Why do you ask? Just curious. I heard she was talented. She was. Made the most beautiful dresses. Mrs. Caldwell used her exclusively, you know. Always said Margaret had the best eye for detail in 3 counties. The woman leaned in conspiratorially. Though I heard she left a dress unfinished when she died. Mrs. Caldwell was fit to be tied, had to find someone else to complete it in time for the governor's ball. Jesse's pulse quickened. Did she find someone? Oh, yes. Brought in a woman from Austin. Cost her 3 times what Margaret would have charged, but Eleanor Caldwell always gets what she wants. The woman smiled. And she did look stunning at the ball. That red dress was the talk of the territory. Red dress, crimson silk with gold embroidery. The dress still existed, and Eleanor Caldwell had worn it, evidence and all, in front of half the territorial government. Jesse thanked the woman and headed back to his horse, his mind racing. If the dress still existed, if it was in Eleanor's wardrobe, then the evidence could be verified. The fabric Bertie had hidden matched. The papers documented the theft. All they needed was to prove the connection. But getting into the Caldwell house, accessing Eleanor's private rooms, finding one specific dress among dozens, it was impossible. Unless... Jesse turned his horse toward the edge of town, toward a small house that sat by itself near the creek. The house where Eliza used to live before she came to work for him. The house where her mother had died and left her with nowhere else to go. He knocked on the door. An elderly black woman answered, her face creasing in surprise. Mr. Carver, I did not expect to see you here. Mrs. Freeman, I need to ask you something. It is about Eliza, about her time working for the Caldwells. The woman's expression shuddered. That was a long time ago. I know, but I think Eliza might have information that could help solve a murder, and I need to know if she would be willing to go back to that house. Just once. Just to help us find the truth. Mrs. Freeman studied him for a long moment. That family destroyed her, Mr. Carver. Broke something in my girl that never quite healed. You asking her to walk back into that house, You asking her to tear open old wounds? I know, and I would not ask if it was not important, if lives were not at stake. Whose lives? My two little girls, orphans, the daughters of the woman who was killed. Mrs. Freeman's eyes softened. The girls you took in? Yes. She nodded slowly. Then you better come in, and you better tell me the whole story. Because if Eliza is going to risk herself for this, she deserves to know exactly what she is fighting for. Jessie told her everything. About Margaret, about the dress, about the evidence hidden in a rabbit's torn seam, about Richard Ashford and the poison and the conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Cedar Hollow power. When he finished, Mrs. Freeman sat in silence for a long time. My daughter already knows most of this, she said finally. She saw things in that house, heard things. She has been carrying those secrets for 12 years, wondering if she should speak up, knowing that speaking up would put a target on her back. The old woman looked at Jessie with eyes that had seen too much pain. You asking her to stop wondering, you asking her to choose. I am. Then I hope you are ready for what comes next, because once you start this, there is no going back. The Caldwells will destroy anyone who threatens them, and they have the power to do it. I know. Do you? Because those girls, they are counting on you now, and if you fail them, if you let the Caldwells win, it will not just be you who pays the price. Jessie thought about Rosie's unyielding determination, about Bertie's whispered confession, about the promise he had made to Margaret's grave that he would protect her daughters no matter what. I will not fail them, he said. Mrs. Freeman nodded. Then go home, talk to Eliza, and may God have mercy on all of you. Jessie rode back toward the ranch, but halfway there, he turned Ash toward the small office at the edge of town where Doc Brennan kept his practice. The doctor was finishing up with a patient when Jessie arrived, and he looked surprised to see the rancher standing in his doorway. Jessie Carver, do not see you in town much these days. Everything all right? Need a favor, Doc? A private one. Brennan ushered him into the back room, closed the door. What kind of favor? I need a blood test. Mine and samples from 2 children. I need to know if there is a biological connection. The doctor was quiet for a moment, his face carefully neutral. This about those orphan girls? Yes. You want to know if they are yours? I want to know the truth, whatever it is. Brennan nodded slowly. All right, give me your arm. He drew blood from Jessie, with practiced efficiency, labeled the vial carefully. For the children, I will need hair samples, several strands from each with the roots intact. Can you get those without them knowing? I can. Bring them to me tomorrow. I will send everything to the Territorial Medical Examiner in Austin. He has the equipment for this kind of testing. Brennan paused. Results will take about a week, maybe less if I mark it urgent. You want them sent to the ranch? Yes, sealed. And Doc, this stays between us. Always does. Brennan cleaned his instruments, then looked at Jessie with something like sympathy. Jessie, I have to ask, what will you do if the answer is not what you want? Jessie thought about Rosie's unyielding determination, about Bertie's whispered confession, about the promise he had made to protect them no matter what. I will keep them anyway, he said. The test is not about deciding whether to keep them. It is about knowing the truth, about being honest with them when the time comes. That is good, because those girls deserve honesty. They have had enough lies. Jessie collected hair samples that night while the girl slept feeling like a thief, even though his intentions were pure. He brought them to Brennan the next morning, and the doctor promised to send word as soon as results arrived. Then Jessie went home and waited, the uncertainty sitting in his chest like a stone. Jessie rode back to the ranch as the sun dipped toward the horizon. When he arrived, he found Rosie and Bertie sitting on the porch steps, Bertie drawing while Rosie kept watch. They looked up as he dismounted, hope and fear warring in their faces. Did you find anything? Rosie asked. I found everything, Jessie said. The dress exists. Eleanor wore it to the governor's ball, and now we need to figure out how to prove it contains evidence of her crimes. How do we do that? We go into the Caldwell house and we take it. Rosie's eyes went wide. That is stealing. It is recovering stolen property. That dress was made by your mother. The fabric Bertie has matches it. We have a right to anything that belonged to Margaret. The Caldwells will not see it that way. No, they will not, which is why we have to be very careful, very smart, and very brave. Rosie stood up, squaring her shoulders. I can be all of those things. I know you can. Jessie looked past her to where Eliza stood in the doorway, listening. But this is not your fight alone. This is all of us, together. Eliza came down the steps slowly. You talked to Mrs. Freeman. I did, and I told her what we are planning. And what are we planning exactly? We are planning to get justice for Margaret Ashmore, and we are going to start by getting that dress. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting 12 years for a chance to strike back. Then we better do it right, she said, because we only get one chance. And if we fail, the Caldwells will make sure none of us survive to try again. They gathered in the kitchen as full dark fell 4 people bound together by secrets and loss and the desperate need to believe that truth mattered more than power. Jessie laid out what he had learned. Eliza added details about the Caldwell house layout, the servants' schedules, Eleanor's habits. Rosie listened with intense concentration, asking sharp questions that proved she understood exactly how dangerous this was. And Bertie drew. She drew the house, the rooms, the dress hanging in a wardrobe. She drew it all from memory, from the glimpses she must have seen when Margaret took her along on fittings, and her charcoal strokes were precise enough to serve as a map. By midnight they had a plan. It was risky. It was borderline insane. But it was the only chance they had. And in 3 days, when Eleanor Caldwell attended the monthly charity board meeting, leaving her house in the hands of just 2 servants, they would execute it. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to gather courage. 3 days before they either found justice or destroyed themselves trying. Jessie looked at the 3 people sitting around his kitchen table. A half-sister who had every reason to hate him but chose to stand with him anyway. A 9-year-old girl who should have been playing with dolls but was instead planning a heist. And a 5-year-old who had stayed silent for a year to protect her sister and finally found her voice in whispers shared with a man who might be her father or might just be another adult who would let her down. This was his family now, not bound by blood but by choice, by shared purpose, by the understanding that some things were worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. All right, Jessie said, let us go over it one more time, every detail, every contingency, because we do not get a second chance at this. And they did. They planned until the candles burned low and Bertie fell asleep with her head on the table and Rosie's eyes started to droop. They planned until Eliza's voice went hoarse and Jessie's coffee went cold. They planned until every person knew their part, every risk had been calculated, every possible outcome had been considered. And then finally they slept. But not before Jessie went upstairs and looked in on the girls one more time. Rosie had carried Bertie to bed and tucked her in, then climbed in beside her sister. They slept tangled together, 2 children who had lost too much and clung to each other because it was the only thing that made sense in a senseless world. Jessie stood in the doorway and made a silent promise to the woman buried in an unmarked grave in Cedar Hollow Cemetery. I will protect them, Margaret. I will give them the justice you deserved, and I will not let your death be in vain. Then he went to his room and tried to sleep, knowing that in 3 days everything would change. One way or another, the truth was coming out. And God help anyone who stood in its way. The 3 days before the heist stretched like years. Jessie worked the ranch with mechanical precision, his hands busy while his mind ran through every possible disaster scenario. Eliza drilled Rosie on the house layout until the girl could navigate the Caldwell mansion blindfolded. And Bertie drew picture after picture of the crimson dress, each one more detailed than the last, as if by rendering it in charcoal she could make their success more certain. On the morning of the operation, Jessie woke before dawn with his heart already racing. He found Eliza in the kitchen, already dressed in the plain gray dress she used to wear when she worked for the Caldwells. She looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only a kind of grim determination. You do not have to do this, Jessie said. We can find another way. There is no other way, you know that. Eliza poured coffee with steady hands. Besides, I have been waiting 12 years for a chance to walk into that house as something other than property. Today I walk in as a thief and a witness. That feels about right. Rosie appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her hair braided so tight it pulled at her temples. "I am ready." "Rosie, you are staying here," Jesse said. "We discussed this. You and Bertie stay at the ranch where it is safe." "You need me." Bertie drew the pictures, but I was there too. I remember which room, which wardrobe, and besides, Rosie's chin came up. Mama was my mother. I have a right to be part of getting justice for her. Jesse looked at Eliza, who shrugged. The girl has a point, and she is small enough to fit through that side window if the doors are locked. Absolutely not. I am not putting a 9-year-old child in danger. You put us in danger the moment you brought us into this house, Rosie said quietly. The moment the Caldwells realized we existed. We are already targets. At least this way we fight back. Jesse wanted to argue, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She was right. The Caldwells would come for them eventually, whether they acted or not. At least this way they had a chance. "Fine," he said finally, "but you follow orders exactly. No improvising. No heroics. Understood. Understood. And Bertie stays here with Mrs. Freeman watching her." Agreed. They left the ranch at 8 in the morning. Mrs. Freeman had arrived at dawn to stay with Bertie, and the old woman held the little girl close as Jesse, Eliza, and Rosie rode away. Jesse looked back once and saw Bertie standing in the doorway with Button clutched to her chest, her green eyes tracking their departure with an intensity that made his stomach clench. She knows, he thought. Somehow she knows this might be the last time she sees us. The ride to Cedar Hollow took an hour. They approached from the east, circling wide to avoid being seen entering from the main road. The Caldwell mansion sat on a hill overlooking the town, a white columned monument to wealth built on the backs of people like Eliza's mother. They tied their horses in a grove of trees a quarter-mile from the house and approached on foot. It was Thursday, 10 in the morning. Eleanor Caldwell would be at the charity board meeting for at least 2 hours. Judge Caldwell was at the courthouse. That left 2 servants in the house, both of whom Eliza knew from her time there. "Martha will be in the kitchen preparing lunch," Eliza said, as they crouched behind the garden wall. "And Samuel will be cleaning the judge's study. That gives us maybe 20 minutes to get upstairs, find the dress, and get out." "What if the wardrobe is locked?" Rosie asked. "Then I pick the lock. I learned skills in that house that the Caldwells never intended." Eliza's smile was sharp. "You ready?" Jesse nodded. They moved quickly across the open lawn, using the cover of the rose garden to reach the side of the house. The window Rosie had identified was on the 2nd floor above the library. A trellis ran up the wall, thick with climbing roses. "I will go first," Eliza said. "Make sure the room is clear. Then Rosie. Jesse, you stay here and keep watch." "Like hell I am staying here." "You are 6 feet tall and built like a barn. You will make noise. I need quiet." Eliza was already climbing before he could argue further. She moved up the trellis like smoke, making no sound despite the creaking wood. At the window she paused, tested the latch, and it swung open. She disappeared inside. 30 seconds later her hand appeared beckoning. Rosie climbed next, nimble as a cat. Jesse watched her small form ascend the trellis and slip through the window, and his heart climbed into his throat. This was insane. He was letting a 9-year-old girl break into the house of the most powerful family in the territory, but there was no turning back now. Jesse positioned himself where he could see both the driveway and the servants' entrance. His hand rested on the gun at his hip, though he prayed he would not need it. If this came down to violence, they had already lost. Inside the house, Eliza and Rosie moved through the library and into the hallway. The mansion was exactly as Eliza remembered it. Thick carpets that swallowed sound. Wallpaper imported from France. Portraits of Caldwell ancestors looking down with expressions of smug superiority. Eleanor's bedroom was at the end of the hall. Eliza tried the door. Locked. She pulled a thin piece of metal from her pocket, the kind used for button hooks, and worked it into the lock. 30 seconds. A soft click. The door swung open. The room beyond was obscene in its luxury. A 4-poster bed draped in silk. A vanity covered in crystal bottles and silver hairbrushes, and along one wall a wardrobe the size of a small bedroom. Eliza opened it. Inside hung dozens of dresses organized by color and season. She began searching through them while Rosie kept watch at the door. "It is not here," Eliza hissed, after checking the red section twice. "The crimson silk, it is not here." "It has to be," Rosie whispered back. "The woman at the shop said Eleanor wore it to the governor's ball." "That was only 3 months ago. She would not have gotten rid of it already. Unless she discovered the evidence, unless she found the papers and burned the dress." "No," Rosie's voice was certain. "Bertie would know. She would have sensed it. The dress is here somewhere." Eliza moved to the second wardrobe, the one that held formal gowns, and there in the back, wrapped in muslin to protect it from dust, she found it. Crimson silk with gold embroidery, the initials E.C., stitched into the hem. And when Eliza ran her hands along the bodice lining, she felt the telltale crinkle of paper hidden in the seams. "Got it," she breathed. That was when they heard footsteps in the hallway. Eliza and Rosie froze. The footsteps came closer, measured and unhurried. A woman's tread, then a voice. "Martha, I forgot my gloves. I am just running back to get them before the meeting resumes." Eleanor Caldwell. She was not supposed to be here. The meeting was supposed to last until noon, but fate and bad timing had conspired to put her in her own house at the exact moment 2 thieves were raiding her wardrobe. Eliza made a split-second decision. She shoved the dress into Rosie's arms, pushed the girl toward the window, and stepped into the hallway, pulling the bedroom door closed behind her. Eleanor stopped at the top of the stairs, her hand on the banister. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, dressed in expensive gray silk, her silver hair arranged in perfect waves. Her eyes widened when she saw Eliza. "You?" Eleanor said. "I know you. You used to work here." "Yes, ma'am." "Eliza Hightower." "What are you doing in my house? How did you get in?" "I came to talk to you about Margaret Ashmore." The name hit like a slap. Eleanor's face went very still, very careful. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do. The seamstress who made your dresses, the one who died last year, the one your cousin murdered because she found evidence of your crimes." Eleanor's hand tightened on the banister. "That is a very serious accusation, one that could land you in jail for slander." "Not slander if it is true, and I have proof." "You have nothing. Now get out of my house before I call the sheriff." "Call him. I would love to tell him how you have been stealing from the Territorial Charity Fund for years, how you falsified records, how you used that money to buy this house, these dresses, this life built on the backs of children and freed slaves who were supposed to receive that aid." Eleanor's face had gone white. "You cannot prove any of that." "Maybe not, but Margaret Ashmore could. She found your records, did she not, hidden in the lining of a dress you sent her to alter, and when she threatened to expose you, Richard Ashford killed her." "You are insane. Richard would never—" "Richard would do anything you asked him to, including murder." Eliza took a step forward. "I worked in this house for 3 years. I heard you and the judge talking. I heard Richard reporting back on his errands. I know what kind of family you are, what kind of people you're willing to destroy to protect your position." Eleanor's hand moved to the bell pull beside the stairs. "Samuel, Samuel, come here at once." Footsteps on the stairs below. A young black man appeared, his eyes going wide when he saw Eliza. "Mrs. Caldwell, this woman is trespassing. Restrain her until the sheriff arrives." Samuel looked at Eliza, then at Eleanor, and something shifted in his face. "Ma'am, That is an order, Samuel." "Yes, ma'am." But he did not move toward Eliza. Instead, he looked at her and gave the smallest shake of his head. A warning, or maybe an apology. Eliza understood. Samuel was trapped just like she had been. He could not help her without losing his position, his livelihood, maybe his life. She did not blame him. "It is all right," Eliza said quietly. "I am going." She turned and walked down the hallway away from Eleanor's bedroom, where Rosie was hopefully escaping through the window with the dress. She descended the stairs with Eleanor following, descended into the grand foyer where the Caldwell family crest was carved into the marble floor. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. By then, Jessie had seen Rosie climb down the trellis with the dress bundled under her arm, had gotten her and the evidence away from the house and back to the horses. But he had also seen the sheriff's wagon coming up the drive, had seen them take Eliza away in handcuffs. He wanted to go after her, wanted to fight, but Rosie grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No," she said fiercely. "That is what they want. They want you to make a scene to give them an excuse to arrest you too. Then they take the dress, and we lose everything." Her eyes were bright with tears, but her voice was steady. "Eliza knew this might happen. She sacrificed herself so we could get away. Do not make that sacrifice meaningless." Jesse watched the wagon disappear down the drive, taking his sister to a jail cell, and he had never felt more helpless in his life. They rode back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, Mrs. Freeman took one look at their faces and knew. They got her. "She let them take her so we could escape with the evidence," Rosie said. She held out the bundled dress. "We have it, the proof Margaret died for." Mrs. Freeman took the dress with shaking hands. "Then we better make damn sure it counts for something, because they will come for the rest of you next." She was right. Eliza was held overnight in the Cedar Hollow jail. Jesse wanted to go to her immediately, wanted to demand her release, but Walsh advised against it when the lawyer arrived at the ranch that evening. "Right now they have her on trespassing," Walsh said. "Eleanor Caldwell is deciding whether to press charges. If you make a scene, if you draw more attention to this, she will press them just to punish you. So we do nothing. We let Eliza sit in a cell. We wait 24 hours. If Eleanor does not file formal charges by then, they have to release her. And I suspect Eleanor will not file, because filing means explaining in court what Eliza was there to find. It means opening that whole can of worms in public." Walsh was right. The next morning, Eliza was released without charges. She returned to the ranch tired but unbroken, and the first thing she did was embrace both girls and tell them she was fine. But that same afternoon, a rider arrived at the ranch with an official-looking envelope. Jesse opened it and felt his blood run cold. It was a petition to the territorial court, filed by Cordelia Caldwell on behalf of the Cedar Hollow Child Welfare Board, requesting an emergency hearing to review Jesse Carver's guardianship of Rosie and Bertie Ashmore on grounds of moral unfitness, criminal association, and providing an unsuitable environment for vulnerable children. The hearing was set for 2 days hence, Judge Samuel Reed presiding. Not Judge Thomas Caldwell, Jesse noted. The Caldwells were being careful, making sure their own family stayed officially separate from the proceedings. But Cordelia would be there as the petitioner, and Eleanor would be watching from the gallery, making sure the message was clear. Give up the investigation or lose the children. Jesse read the document 3 times, then set it on the table where Rosie could see it. "What does this mean?" she asked. "It means they are trying to take you and Bertie away from me." "Can they do that?" "They can try. The hearing is in 3 days. We present our case, they present theirs, and Judge Reed decides." "What if he decides they are right? What if he takes us away?" Jesse looked at this resolute child who had been through too much, who deserved safety and certainty, and instead got endless battles and impossible choices. "Then I fight it. I appeal. I make noise until someone listens." And if nobody listens? Jesse thought about his promise to Rosie that first night, about the vow he had made at Margaret's grave, about the man he used to be and the man these children needed him to become. "Then I take you and your sister, and we ride west until we are beyond the reach of the Caldwell family and their corrupt system. We start over somewhere they cannot touch us. That is running away. That is protecting you. There is a difference." Rosie studied his face for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "I do not want to run. I want to fight. I want to stand in that courtroom and tell the truth about what happened to Mama, about what the Caldwells did, about all of it." "Rosie, you are 9 years old. The court might not even let you testify. Then make them let me. You said Mama taught me that truth matters. Well, let me tell it. Let me fight for her the way you are fighting for us." Jesse squeezed her hand, feeling the calluses on her small fingers, the strength in her grip. "All right, we fight. All of us together." But that night, after the girls were in bed, Jesse sat alone in his study and faced a truth he had been avoiding. 8 days ago, he had sent blood samples to Doc Brennan. 8 days of waiting, of wondering, of hoping and fearing in equal measure. The letter had arrived that afternoon, delivered quietly by Doc Brennan himself, rather than trusting it to a courier. Jesse had not opened it immediately. had carried it in his coat pocket through dinner, through putting the girls to bed, through all the rituals of evening. But now, alone in the dark, he could not put it off any longer. He pulled out the envelope and opened it. Jesse had asked him to run a test, had provided samples of his own blood and samples from both girls. The results were clear, definitive, scientific. Jesse Carver was not the biological father of Rosie or Bertie Ashmore. The blood types did not match. The inheritance patterns were wrong. There was no genetic connection between them, which meant Margaret had been pregnant with someone else's child when Jesse left, or had gotten pregnant shortly after. Either way, these girls were not his daughters, not by blood, not by biology, not by any measure that the law would recognize as legitimate grounds for his attachment to them. He should have felt relieved, should have felt the weight of guilt lift knowing that he had not abandoned his own children, had not caused Margaret to struggle alone with his offspring. Instead, he felt hollowed out, because somewhere in the past weeks he had started to believe they were his, had started to build a future in his mind where he was their father, not just by choice, but by right, where his love for them was validated by biology, made acceptable by blood. But they were not his, and loving them anyway, choosing them anyway, meant facing the world without that validation, meant standing up and saying, "These are my daughters," when the law and society and even nature itself said they were not. It meant being brave in a way Jesse had never managed before. He heard a sound at the door and looked up to find Eliza standing there. She had been released that afternoon after Frederick Walsh, the lawyer Jesse had hired, had argued that she was being held without charges. Eleanor Caldwell had not pressed the trespassing complaint, probably because doing so would require explaining what Eliza had been trespassing to find. "You got the results," Eliza said. "It was not a question. How did you know I even ordered the test?" "Because I know you. You needed to be sure before you committed to this fight." "And now I am sure. They are not mine." Eliza came into the room and sat across from him. "Does it matter? The law will say it does. Cordelia Caldwell will argue that I have no legitimate claim to these children, that I am a stranger who bought them on a whim and now should give them up to a proper family. And what will you say?" Jesse looked down at the test results, at the scientific proof that he and these girls shared no blood. "I will say that family is not made in the blood. It is made in the choice to stay, even when staying is hard, especially when staying is hard." Eliza reached across the desk and took the paper from his hands. She walked to the fireplace and threw it in. They watched it burn together, the evidence of biological disconnect turning to ash. "There," Eliza said. "Now no one can use it against you. They will just order another test. Let them. By the time results come back, the hearing will be over. And you will have made your case not based on blood, but based on love." She turned to face him. That is what Margaret would have wanted, not a biological father who showed up too late, but a chosen father who showed up when it mattered. Jesse nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that had been eating at him since the results arrived. "Did you know, before the test, I suspected Rosie does not look like you, neither does Bertie. They look like Margaret, and maybe they look like their real father, whoever he was, but they do not look like a Carver. Why did you not say anything?" "Because it did not matter, does not matter. You chose them. They chose you. That is enough." But it was not enough for Rosie. Jesse discovered that the next morning when he found her sitting on the porch steps with the burned remains of the test results in her hands. She must have pulled them from the fireplace after everyone went to bed, must have pieced together enough of the charred paper to read the verdict. She looked up at him with eyes that held no surprise, no shock, just a kind of sad certainty. "You know," Jesse said, sitting beside her, "I have always known. Mama told me about my father before she died. His name was Thomas. He was a miner. He died in a collapse when I was 3, and Bertie was not even born yet. Mama was already pregnant with Bertie when it happened. So when I showed up at the auction, when you realized I had known your mother, I thought maybe you were trying to make up for leaving her, for being one of the men who hurt her by leaving. But I never thought you were my actual father." Rosie's voice was steady. "Mama told me the truth. She did not want me to spend my life wondering. Then why did you not tell me? Because you needed to believe it. You needed to think we might be yours so you would have a reason to keep us, to fight for us." Rosie looked at the burned paper in her hands. I was afraid if you knew the truth you would realize you did not owe us anything, that you could walk away with a clear conscience." Jesse felt something crack open in his chest. "Rosie, I am not walking away, not now, not ever." "You do not have to say that." "I am not saying it because I have to. I am saying it because it is true. You and Bertie are not my biological children, but you are my daughters, the ones I chose, the ones who chose me back, and that matters more than any blood test." Rosie's eyes filled with tears. "People will say you are crazy, that you have no real claim to us. Let them say it. I have spent 7 years caring what people think, and it got me nothing but loneliness. I would rather have you and your sister and the whole world's judgment than go back to that empty house and that empty life." "What about the hearing? What about the Caldwells? We fight, we tell the truth. We show Judge Reed that family is built on more than biology, and we trust that justice exists even in a system designed to protect the powerful." Rosie wiped her eyes and stood up. "Then we better get ready, because the Caldwells will not make this easy." She was right. The next day and a half passed in a blur of preparation. Walsh drilled Jesse on testimony, coached Rosie on how to speak in court, prepared their evidence. The crimson dress with its hidden papers. Eliza's testimony about what she had witnessed in the Caldwell household. Bertie's drawing of Richard Ashford, the piece of fabric that matched the dress perfectly. And through it all, Bertie watched in silence, drawing picture after picture of the courtroom she had never seen but somehow knew was coming. The morning of the hearing dawned hot and cloudless. Jesse dressed in his best suit, the one he had worn to his father's funeral 7 years ago. Rosie wore a new dress that Abigail Morrison had made for her, simple and clean, and Bertie wore yellow, the color of hope, with button tucked under her arm. The courthouse was packed. Half of Cedar Hollow had turned out, drawn by gossip and genuine concern in equal measure. Jesse saw familiar faces in the crowd: Hank Perkins and his wife, Abigail Morrison, the shopkeeper from the general store, and in the front row, Cordelia Caldwell in a dress that cost more than most families earned in a year, her expression arranged in careful concern. Eleanor Caldwell sat 2 rows back, her face a mask of polite interest. But Jesse saw the calculation in her eyes, the way she tracked every movement, like a hawk watches a field mouse. Judge Samuel Reed called the court to order. He was a big man, white-haired and weathered, with eyes that had presided over 100 cases and seen most forms of human weakness. He looked at the packed courtroom and shook his head slightly, as if already regretting the circus this was about to become. "We are here to consider a petition filed by Mrs. Cordelia Caldwell regarding the guardianship of Rosie and Bertie Ashmore, currently in the care of Mr. Jesse Carver. Mrs. Caldwell, you may present your case." Cordelia stood, her lawyer beside her. Marcus Garrett, imported from Austin, a man with a voice like silk over steel. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. Mr. Carver is a bachelor rancher with no experience in child-rearing, no female presence in his household to provide proper moral guidance, and no legitimate connection to these children. He purchased them at an orphan auction in a moment of what can only be described as impulse, and has since been operating under the delusion that good intentions are sufficient to make a family." Garrett went on building a case that was methodical and damning. He called witnesses who testified to Jesse's isolation, his lack of social connections, his reputation as cold and unapproachable. He painted a picture of a lonely man trying to fill a void in his life by acquiring children like one might acquire livestock. Then he called Eleanor Caldwell to the stand. She took the oath with a hand on the Bible, her voice clear and steady. Under Garrett's questioning, she explained that she had employed Margaret Ashmore as a seamstress, had always found her work satisfactory, had been saddened to hear of her death. "And did you have any contact with Miss Ashmore in the days before her death?" Garrett asked. "No, I was out of town at the time visiting family in Austin. I did not learn of her passing until I returned 2 weeks later." "So you certainly did not have any altercation with her, any dispute?" "Of course not. Margaret was a valued employee. I had no reason to wish her harm. It was smoothly done, perfectly delivered." Eleanor was establishing an alibi, creating distance between herself and Margaret's death before anyone could suggest a connection. Walsh stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Caldwell, you say you were in Austin when Margaret Ashmore died. Can you provide documentation of that hotel receipts, perhaps witnesses who saw you there?" Eleanor smiled. "I was staying with my sister. I am sure she would be happy to testify if needed." "I am sure she would. How convenient that family can always be relied upon to support family." Walsh paused. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you recognize this dress?" He held up the crimson silk, and Jessie saw Eleanor's face go very still. "It looks like one of mine." "More than looks like. This is the dress Margaret Ashmore was working on when she died, the dress you wore to the governor's ball 3 months ago. Is it not? I may have worn something similar." "Not similar, this exact dress. With your initials embroidered in the hem. See." Walsh held up the fabric, showed the courtroom the gold EC stitched into the silk. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "If you say so." "I do say so, and I also say that this dress contains something very interesting in its lining." Walsh produced the papers, unfolded them for the court to see. Records of the Territorial Charity Fund, showing systematic theft over a period of 5 years, showing money diverted from orphanages and hospitals and schools into private accounts, accounts controlled by you, Mrs. Caldwell. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Reed banged his gavel. "Order, order, in this court." Eleanor's face had gone white. "I have no idea what you are talking about. If those papers were in my dress, they were planted there." "By whom?" "By Margaret Ashmore, who found them hidden in a dress you sent her to alter. By Margaret, who threatened to expose your crimes and was murdered for it." "Objection!" Garrett was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. My client is not on trial here. This hearing is about Mr. Carver's fitness as a guardian, not wild accusations of murder." "Your Honor," Walsh said calmly, "the two issues are connected. Mrs. Caldwell is attempting to remove these children from Mr. Carver's care because they are witnesses to her crimes. Rosie Ashmore saw her mother murdered. Bertie Ashmore can identify the killer. This petition is not about child welfare. It is about silencing witnesses." Reed's expression was thunderous. "Counselor, those are serious charges. Do you have evidence to support them?" "I do, Your Honor. I call Rosie Ashmore to the stand." Rosie stood, her legs shaking but her spine straight. She walked to the witness box and took the oath in a voice that only trembled slightly. Then she looked out at the courtroom, at the sea of faces watching her, and began to speak. "My name is Rosie Ashmore. I am 9 years old, and I watched my mother die." She told them everything. About the night a man came to their boarding house, about the argument she overheard, about the tea that was poured, about her mother's convulsions, and the man who walked away. "That man was Richard Ashford," Rosie said, pointing at the gallery, where a tall man with gray temples sat frozen. "He poisoned my mother because she found evidence that Eleanor Caldwell was stealing from the charity fund, evidence that would have destroyed the Caldwell family if it became public." Richard Ashford stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I will not sit here and listen to a child's fantasy." "Sit down, Mr. Ashford," Judge Reed said quietly. "You will have your chance to respond." But Ashford was already moving toward the door. 2 deputies stepped in front of him, blocking his exit. "I said sit down." Ashford sat, his face mottled with rage. Walsh continued questioning Rosie, drawing out every detail of that night. Then he called Eliza to the stand. Eliza walked to the witness box with her head high. She took the oath and met the courtroom's eyes without flinching. "My name is Eliza Hightower. I worked in the Caldwell household for 3 years, and I witnessed Eleanor Caldwell and Richard Ashford discussing the theft of charity funds on multiple occasions. She testified to conversations overheard, to records she had seen, to the systematic corruption that had enriched the Caldwells while children went hungry and schools went without books." "Why did you not speak up before?" Garrett demanded, on cross-examination. "Why wait until now?" "Because I was a black woman working for a white family in Texas," Eliza said flatly. "Because speaking up would have gotten me killed. Because I had no proof and no power and no reason to believe anyone would listen to me over them. And yet now you expect us to believe you, to take your word over that of one of the most respected families in the territory." "I do not expect you to take my word. I expect you to look at the evidence, the papers in the dress, the records that show exactly where the money went, the testimony of a child who has no reason to lie." Eliza leaned forward. I expect you to choose justice over comfort, truth over power, the right thing over the easy thing." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even Garrett seemed at a loss for words. Then Judge Reed spoke. "Mr. Walsh, do you have any further witnesses?" "One more, Your Honor. I call Bertie Ashmore to the stand." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Everyone in Cedar Hollow knew that Bertie Ashmore did not speak. Calling her to testify seemed like a cruel joke. But Bertie stood. She walked to the front of the courtroom with Button under her arm. She climbed into the witness box, her small form nearly swallowed by the oversized chair. And she looked at Judge Reed with those enormous green eyes. "Miss Bertie," Reed said gently, "do you understand where you are?" Bertie nodded. "Do you understand that some people want to take you away from Mr. Carver?" Bertie nodded again, her hands tightening on Button. "And do you want to stay with Mr. Carver?" Bertie nodded so hard her whole body moved. "I appreciate that, child, but I need more than a nod. I need to understand what you want, what you need." Reed's voice was kind, but firm. "Can you show me any way you can?" Bertie sat very still. The courtroom held its breath. Cordelia Caldwell leaned forward, victory already forming in her expression. The child could not speak, could not testify. The case was as good as won. Then Bertie reached under Button and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully, held it up for Reed to see. It was a drawing. 3 figures standing in front of a house. A tall man in a hat, a girl with wild hair holding his hand, and a smaller girl between them holding both their hands. Above the house, in shaky but legible letters, was a single word: home. The courtroom went dead silent. Then Bertie's mouth opened. Her eyes found Jessie across the room, and she spoke. Not Papa, not the word everyone expected, the word that would have been sweet and simple and easy to dismiss as a child's attachment to any adult who showed her kindness. Instead, Bertie said, "Eleanor Caldwell poisoned Mama." Her voice was small and rusty from disuse, but it carried in the silent courtroom like a gunshot. "I saw her. Not just Richard. Eleanor was there too. She came after Richard left. She told Mama—" Bertie's voice shook but did not stop. "She told Mama that she should have burned the papers when she had the chance, that she should have kept her mouth shut. And then she poured more poison in Mama's tea, made her drink it. And Mama—" Bertie's face crumpled. "Mama looked at me and Rosie, and she tried to tell us to run, but she could not talk anymore, and then she just stopped moving." Eleanor Caldwell shot to her feet. "This is absurd. A child's fantasy." "I was in Austin, I told you." "You were supposed to be in Austin?" Bertie said, still looking at Judge Reed. "But you came back early. You came back because Richard told you Mama would not listen, that she was going to expose you, so you came back and you killed her yourself." "I did no such thing." "This child is lying. She has been coached." "Bertie does not lie," Rosie said from her seat. "Bertie has not spoken in a year because she was too scared of what happened. But she is not scared anymore. She is telling the truth." Judge Reed banged his gavel, but the courtroom was already chaos. Eleanor was screaming denials. Richard Ashford was trying to leave again. Cordelia sat frozen in shock, staring at her mother-in-law with dawning horror. And Jesse sat with tears streaming down his face, watching Bertie speak for the first time in a year, watching her be brave, in a way that would have destroyed most adults. It took 10 minutes for Reed to restore order. When he did, his face was grave. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Ashford, you will both remain in this courtroom. Deputies, make sure of it." He turned to Bertie. "Miss Bertie, I know this is hard, but I need to ask you some questions. Can you do that?" Bertie nodded. "You said you saw Eleanor Caldwell poison your mother. Are you absolutely certain it was her?" "Yes." "How can you be sure it was dark you were scared?" "I am sure." Bertie's voice was stronger now. "She wore the red dress, the one Mama was making for her, and she had a ring with a green stone that caught the light. And she smelled like roses, the same roses that grow in her garden. I remember because Mama used to take me with her when she delivered dresses, and I always smelled those roses." Reed looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you own a ring with a green stone?" Eleanor's hand moved involuntarily to her right hand, where a large emerald ring sat on her finger. She caught herself, but too late. "That proves nothing," Garrett said, but his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps not by itself, Reed agreed. But combined with the documentary evidence, the testimony of multiple witnesses, and the fact that a 5-year-old child has just broken a year of silence to accuse you. He shook his head. Mrs. Caldwell, I am ordering an investigation into the death of Margaret Ashmore, and I am placing you under house arrest pending the outcome of that investigation. Eleanor's face went white. You cannot do this. My husband is a judge. I have rights. Your husband is a judge in a different circuit. He has no jurisdiction here. And as for your rights, you will have every opportunity to defend yourself. But right now, I have heard enough to warrant serious concern. Reed turned to the deputies. Take her into custody. As Eleanor was led away, still protesting, Cordelia Caldwell stood slowly. She looked at her mother-in-law, then at the crimson dress, then at the two girls sitting beside Jessie. Your Honor, Cordelia said quietly, I would like to withdraw my petition. Garrett grabbed her arm. Mrs. Caldwell, we discussed this. We had a strategy. The strategy was based on protecting my family. Cordelia pulled her arm free. But I will not protect murderers. I will not take children away from a man who loves them in order to shield a woman who killed their mother. She looked at Jessie. Mr. Carver, I apologize. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong to let my family's influence blind me to the truth. She walked out of the courtroom without waiting for a response, leaving Garrett standing alone. Judge Reed waited until the chaos subsided, then addressed Jessie directly. Mr. Carver, I have a question for you, and I want you to answer honestly. Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Brennan submitted medical records to this court this morning at my request. Blood test results showing the biological relationship between you and these children. Reed's face was grave. The results indicate no genetic connection. You are not their biological father. Is that correct? Jessie's stomach dropped. Of course, Reed had ordered the records. Any judge reviewing a guardianship case would want medical documentation. He should have expected this. But the judge's expression was not unkind, just searching. That is correct, Your Honor. And yet you are here today fighting for the right to keep them. Why? Jessie stood slowly. He looked at Rosie, who was watching him with eyes too old for her 9 years, at Bertie, who had found her voice to tell the truth, at Eliza, who had risked everything to stand with him. Because I love them, Your Honor, not because of biology or obligation or guilt, just love, pure and simple. Jessie's voice was steady. They are my daughters, the ones I chose when no one else would, the ones who chose me back when I gave them every reason not to, and I will fight for them every day for the rest of my life. Even knowing that the law gives you no legitimate claim that anyone could challenge this at any time, then I will fight every challenge. I will stand in front of every judge. I will make my case again and again until the world understands that these girls belong with me, not because of blood but because of love. Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Mr. Carver, I am going to ask you one more question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Yes, Your Honor. Do you promise to raise these children with honesty, integrity, and love, to give them education and opportunity, to protect them from harm, to be their father in every way that matters, even when it is hard, even when others question you, even when the easy road would be to walk away? Jessie looked at Rosie and Bertie. They looked back at him, hope and fear warring in their young faces. I promise, Your Honor, with everything I am and everything I have. Reed nodded slowly. Then he picked up his gavel and brought it down with a crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. The petition is denied. Full legal guardianship is granted to Jessie Carver. Furthermore, I am ordering expedited adoption proceedings to make this arrangement permanent and irrevocable. He looked at the girls. Rosie, Bertie, you will remain with Mr. Carver, and from this day forward you will be known as Rosie and Bertie Carver. Daughters not by blood but by choice. And that is the strongest kind of family there is. Rosie burst into tears. Bertie climbed out of the witness box and ran to Jessie, who caught her and held her while she cried into his shoulder. And for the first time in over a year, the crying made sound great, gulping sobs of relief and release, and the understanding that she was finally truly safe. Jessie held both his daughters while the courtroom erupted in applause and tears. He held them and felt the weight of 7 years of loneliness lift from his shoulders. He held them and knew that he had finally found what he had been running from. A reason to stay, a reason to fight, a reason to believe that redemption was possible even for cowards who showed up too late. 6 months later, on a cold February morning, 4 people stood in the Cedar Hollow Cemetery before a new headstone carved from white marble. Margaret Elizabeth Ashmore, beloved mother, 1854 to 1883. She made something beautiful out of whatever she was handed. Rosie placed flowers at the base of the stone. Bertie set down a drawing she had made, protected by glass, showing Margaret sewing by lamplight with 2 small girls at her feet. Eliza stood with her hand on Bertie's shoulder, silent but present, and Jesse knelt in front of the stone, placed his palm flat against the cold marble, and spoke the words he had carried for too long. "Margaret, I am sorry I was not there when you needed me. I am sorry I ran instead of staying. I am sorry I chose the easy road over the right one." His voice was rough with emotion. "But I want you to know that your daughters are safe. They are loved. They have a home and a future and every opportunity I can give them. I am not their biological father, but I am their father in every way that counts. And I will make sure they know every day that they are wanted, that they are chosen, that they are worth fighting for." He paused, then added, "Eliza is teaching them to cook your recipes. Rosie is learning to sew. And Bertie draws pictures of you that keep you alive in ways I never could with words. They remember you. They honor you. And they know that the strength they have comes from you." Rosie knelt beside him, added her hand to his on the stone. "Mama, I found a family. Not the one you might have wanted for me, but the one I needed. Papa Jesse is not perfect, but he stays. And staying is what matters." Bertie knelt on Jesse's other side. She did not speak, but she placed her drawing against the headstone, a gift for the mother who could no longer see it. And Eliza, who had been a slave, and then a servant, and then a half-sister, and now was simply family, knelt behind all 3 of them and placed her hands on their shoulders. "Margaret," she said quietly, "you raised warriors, and we will make sure the world knows it." They stayed there for a long time, 4 people bound together by loss and choice, and the understanding that family was not about blood, but about the decision to stay when leaving would be easier. Finally, as the sun climbed higher and the day began in earnest, they stood and walked back to the wagon together. Jesse helped the girls up, Eliza climbed beside them, and they drove away from the cemetery toward the ranch that was no longer a refuge from the world, but a home within it. Behind them the headstone stood bright and clean in the winter sun, and on it those final words that Margaret had lived by, and her daughters would carry forward. She made something beautiful out of whatever she was handed. Jesse Carver looked at his 2 daughters, at his sister, who had chosen to forgive him, at the life they were building together from the broken pieces of the past, and thought that maybe Margaret's philosophy was right. Maybe all of them in their own broken way were making something beautiful. Not perfect, not easy, but beautiful in its honesty, its hard-won love, its refusal to give up even when giving up seemed like the only option. As they crested the hill that overlooked the ranch, Bertie spoke for the 3rd time that day. "Papa, can we stop here for a minute?" Jesse pulled the wagon to a halt. Bertie climbed down and walked to the edge of the overlook where the whole valley spread out below them. The ranch house, the barns, the corrals, the pastures running to the horizon, all of it bathed in morning light, all of it solid and real and theirs. Rosie joined her sister, then Eliza, then Jesse. The 4 of them stood in a line looking at the future they had fought for. "This is ours," Bertie asked, her voice small but certain. "This is ours," Jesse confirmed. "Forever, forever." Bertie nodded, satisfied. Then she opened her notebook and began to draw. Not the ranch below, but the 4 of them standing on this hill looking at everything they had built together from nothing but choice and courage, and the stubborn refusal to let the past define the future. When she finished, she wrote across the top in careful letters that were getting stronger every day. "Our family, February 1885, forever." And beneath it in smaller letters that only she would understand, "We chose each other. That is enough." Jesse looked at those words and felt something settle in his chest. Something that had been restless and seeking for 7 years finally came to rest. She was right. They had chosen each other, and that was not just enough. It was everything. They climbed back into the wagon and drove home, 4 people who had learned the hard way that family was not about deserving or earning or even understanding. It was about showing up, about staying, about choosing to love even when love was complicated and messy and born from guilt and loss and the ashes of what came before, about making something beautiful out of whatever you were handed. And as they disappeared over the hill toward home, the Texas sun climbed higher, indifferent and eternal, shining on the just and the unjust alike, on those who ran and those who stayed, on the ending of one story and the beginning of another that would span generations. A story about 2 orphan girls and a lonely man who saved each other. A story about a woman whose death demanded justice and got it even from beyond the grave. A story about family built not on blood, but on the radical act of choosing to stay when the world gave you every reason to leave. The kind of story that would be told around fires and dinner tables for years to come, growing with each telling until it became legend. But on that February morning in 1885, it was just 4 people going home. And that was miracle enough.